For this video, we're going to continue looking at how to analyze the central idea in a text. And I have to admit, I never really liked the term central idea. I don't think it's that great because it gives you the idea that there's one idea in any story or even a book or a chapter or a scene, and there may be multiple. The multiple ideas you find might relate to each other or connect, but some might be different, some might be distinct, and that's okay. So I think sometimes when we talk about central idea, it makes us look for just one thing when that's not necessarily how a text is written. The best thing to me is sometimes to look for a lot of things. Practice finding multiple ideas by shifting what we'll call your analytical lens. Like sometimes you have a lens that's zooming in and sometimes you're zooming out, looking at broader things or specific things. So what we're going to do today is look at 3 different areas where we might find a central idea or a key idea, we might call it. So we're going to look at a text and we're going to think about 3 levels. One is, can we get an idea out of a moment of what we'll call structural significance? That means think of like narrative structure. Where do we know key things happen? Most obvious layout of that is the beginning, the middle, the end. But if you know anything about narrative structure, there are lots of other things that come throughout a text. We might call it the rising action, the falling action, the climax, all sorts of different areas where key things happen. So if you're in one of those scenes, you should look at it from that perspective. Where are you structurally, and what's the idea of this key moment in the scenes or the text's narrative structure? That's zooming out, right? Zooming in a little bit further might say, let's look at a character interaction in this scene and ask what's the main idea behind this character interaction. Zooming in even further might be, let's look at just a symbol, an image, a description, and ask what's a central idea here. So if we're looking at kind of that, small, medium, large view of things, and each time we look at that view, we ask for a different close-up, or a different far-away shot, and then analyze it from that perspective. What's the idea to that lens? What's the idea to that moment? One, it gives us good practice in finding ideas, and 2, it shows us that there's lots of ideas there. I think the key thing behind this kind of skill, and the reason it's part of lots of curricula, it's definitely New York State standards, it's definitely related to our English regents, and other testing that has to be done, is it's really just about reading well, and there can be lots of answers to a question in an English class. There's no one answer like 2 + 2 is 4. But what I would say is, we know that 2 + 2 is 4, but we also know that 2 + 2 is not 5, right? So while there's no one answer like 4 to an English question, meaning what does this scene mean, there's a lot of 2 + 2 = 5s, meaning you can have multiple correct answers, but you could probably have a lot more answers that don't make sense. And that's really the concerning thing, is we've got to make sure that when we're reading something and we're pulling an idea out of it, that the idea doesn't sound like 2 + 2 = 5. It's got to relate. It's got to be connected. And so this strategy helps you kind of, sharpen your skills in pulling out related ideas by forcing you to look at different aspects. So in my class, we're doing Lord of the Flies right now. And if we go to this scene right at the beginning, these boys have been stranded on a deserted island. Their plane has crashed. It's just young boys. And one boy kind of takes the lead. His name is Ralph. And famously, what he does is he takes this shell, they call it a conch, and he blows into it to create this trumpet-like sound. And then the boys all kind of come to him. And that's how he becomes their leader. As the boys are coming to him, there's this moment right at the beginning, which we've talked about in my class, where Ralph blows the horn and this group shows up. It used to be like in the previous moment, one or two kids would come at a time, but in this moment, this whole group is showing up. It says, within the diamond haze of the beach, something dark was fumbling along. Ralph watched. The creature was a party of boys. So it's not a creature. It's not something dark. It's just a group of boys that he can't quite see until it gets clearer. And they're marching in two parallel lines, dressed in strange clothing. Each boy wore a square black cap with a silver badge on it. Their bodies were hidden by black cloaks, which bore a long silver cross on the left breast. So they're wearing the same uniform or outfit. The reason is they're all the boys from the choir back home, the church choir. It says the boy who controlled them, so their leader, was dressed in the same way, though his cap badge was golden. When his party was about 10 yards from the platform, that's where Ralph is, he shouted an order and they halted. The boy himself came forward, vaulted onto the platform with his cloak flying. "Where is the man with the trumpet?" Ralph answered him, "There is no man with a trumpet, only me." The boy came close and peered down at Ralph. What he saw of the fair-haired boy with the creamy shell on his knees did not seem to satisfy him. He turned quickly, his black cloak circling. So this is just a small moment. And we're using this book because it's very simple to read. It's quite short, but there's a lot packed into it. And what we can do is find 3 types of central ideas in just this small moment. So look at what I'm going to do with it. So here's my kind of chart. But remember this, I'm looking for a central idea from a moment of narrative structure, structural significance, from a moment of character interaction, and from a key image or symbol. So first thing we have is like this introduction of the choir boys, and they're a key group of characters in the text. And so this is like the first scene with them. So that to me is this narrative structure. I'm analyzing the beginning of this book and something that's important about the beginning. And then on the smaller scale, but not the smallest scale, we have Ralph and Jack meeting. So Jack is the head of the choir. He's the other main, boy in this group. And we have this moment at the end of the scene where the two of them meet for the first time. And then on the smallest level, we have, Ralph blowing the conch and Jack thinking it's a trumpet. So that symbol, that image of the shell being used as a trumpet is something I want to get an idea from. So look at what I do. I have 3 levels here, 3 central ideas. There's the introduction of the choir, there's Jack and Ralph's meeting, a character relationship idea, and then there's the conch. In each idea, I'm going to link it to a literary technique and narrative strategy, which is what we have to do on the Regents exam, and show how that technique or that strategy leads to an idea. So to me, in this scene, if we're focused on the choir as being introduced, the visual description of them suggests that appearances can be deceiving. Why? Well, first, Ralph sees them as this dark beast fumbling along the beach. He thinks they're almost a monster. Then he realizes that they have uniforms, church outfits on. You would think that the church boys are not monstrous beasts, right? You would think that they're associated with innocence and purity and goodness. As we'll see later in the text, these are the dangerous kids to watch out for. So I think there's this key idea right here immediately of their duality. They both look kind of scary and look kind of innocent, look kind of like they should be good. So maybe the idea, sometimes those whose outward appearances should be trusting, right? The church kids should be trusting, might be the most dangerous. Maybe they really are a dark, fumbling creature. Okay, then I go to Jack and Ralph's meeting, which is not so much focused on the church outfits. The visual descriptions of the meeting between Ralph and Jack suggest that perception matters. Both Ralph and Jack initially see one another as something else, right? So we focus in on how Ralph is watching Jack as he comes up, and he's the one who sees something dark, a creature. It will be difficult for them to shake their senses, what their senses first perceive. What does Jack first perceive? He thinks that Ralph is a man who's there to save them or protect them. Where's the man with the trumpet? But Jack also can't see Ralph because of the sunlight in this scene. So he doesn't see him until he gets there. And it says he peers down at him, meaning he's taller. Um, and he was not satisfied. So Ralph sees a dark creature. Jack thinks he sees a man, and then he realizes it's a boy, and he's not satisfied. Well, that's kind of how they treat each other for the rest of the book. We often do read a book by its cover. No matter what else happens, those initial readings or misreadings judge future interactions. Okay, so what that means is Ralph is going to see a dark creature in Jack, and Jack is going to see a boy who thinks he's a man and be annoyed by it. And what's interesting is they're both kind of misguided, and yet that is kind of who they are. So there's something about that. Finally, there's the conch in this scene. So we have Ralph picking up a shell and blowing into it like it's a horn. That's a very powerful, famous visual, metaphor in this book. What's interesting about it is Jack does think it's a trumpet, and a trumpet is something used like in the military to call to order, to wake people up. And I think that's interesting because it's not a trumpet. A trumpet is a human-made object. It's a thing that we use to civilize ourselves, to order ourselves. This is a natural object, though. It's a shell. It's made in nature not for this purpose. So there's a duality there, too. The visual and auditory description of the conch suggests that nature and civilization are intertwined. This natural object could be used as a trumpet, which is a symbol of military order. But it's not a trumpet. Will the kids obey when they realize it's not actually something made to put them in order, to civilize them? Do they need to see, proof that Ralph really has the authority to lead them, if it's not just him using this random shell? And it almost seems like Jack is our test case there, because he immediately sees Ralph and is like, oh, well, you don't have a trumpet. If he was older and had a trumpet, then he'd be a leader. But it's just a shell. So people need to see evidence of society, or they'll do what Jack will do, which is give in to animal instinct. There won't be order, there will be chaos. So that conch now connects to that central idea of, the duality of nature and civilization. So you see how I can get so much from so little, but by breaking it down into asking for 3 different types of ideas. So what I want you to do to practice this is I have this scene talking about structure. We have the beginning. Now this is the end, the very last scene. And you can read it, but the way I would practice it is same thing, break it down. There's this officer at the end, and he interacts with Ralph. And crucially, Jack. Jack is not named. It says a little boy who wore the remains of an extraordinary black cap on his red hair, and who carried the remains of a pair of spectacles, started forward, then changed his mind and stood still. So Jack is there, and Ralph is there. What's going on when they meet this officer on the beach? What would be the central idea from that? How do Jack and Ralph react to each other, or at least react to the officer, and what does that show about the end of their relationship here? And what about an image? What's Jack holding there? How is Jack described? You could pick different images, but the point is to practice getting different central ideas from one scene through these different lenses. So what I want you to do in class is you're going to come in, practice this, do 3 different text analyses as a book club group, and write them all out. What's the central idea? What's the technique that reveals the central idea? And this is kind of what we're building to long term here, is if we can find 3 kind of related ideas, because if you look at this, these 3 central ideas are distinct, but they're not that distinct. There's a connection there between all of them. And when we find a connection between different ideas, that, on the small scale, on its own is interesting, but on the larger scale, that's how we get to a longer term, larger essay. That's a thesis, where we can connect lots of ideas by one controlling idea. So we are moving towards essay writing, but these are the building blocks of it, which is learn how to focus in and get ideas that make sense for the scene, that aren't random, that don't, it's not 2 plus 2 is 5. It's got to be possible answer, possible explanation of what's going on. So we'll work on that in class. See you there.